It's Shevat. I so welcome our Shabbat rest this week because I need to tell you that my heart is sore. The On Being radio host, Krista Tippett, wrote a letter a few days ago titled, "My heart is sore, your heart is sore, let it be the common ground between us." Tippett writes, "We are profoundly distressed, intimately and globally, at a nervous system level. And this distress crosses every identity and dividing line. Opinion polls have their uses, I suppose, but they don't unearth that beneath whatever simplistic answer I give to a simplistic question, my heart is sore, and your heart is sore." To anyone paying attention to the ICE operation in Minneapolis these past weeks, you may have a sore heart as well. Seeing your own stream of videos of those with accents or brown skin, or individuals speaking Spanish, being questioned or detained or worse, and then witnessing those protesting being met with other types of violence. At least 2 protesters have been killed in just this last month. We are once again confronted with violence. Thank God we have technology that keeps it from being hidden. And yet, how do we continue to see all of this and find any sense of peace? So many of us across political lines and identities are feeling enormous insecurity at this moment. Those being targeted and those who love them. Those charged with enforcing the law and those who support their efforts. Fear and anxiety are undeniably present right now in public life. But fear alone, it can't be the measure of a moral vision, because fear doesn't erase harm, and it doesn't absolve us of a responsibility for how power should be exercised in the world. Our tradition asks more of us than just explaining each other. It asks us to see one another, to protect dignity, and to resist systems that turn human beings into abstractions. So I want to speak really clearly this morning, both with empathy for all of those who sit in fear, and also with a clear condemnation of policies that target and dehumanize our neighbors. When I try to look at the world through God's eyes, I don't see face masks or uniforms or protest signs or guns. I see human beings with hearts aching. And I see systems that are producing real harm that should trouble us so deeply. In this week's Torah portion, we read of the Israelites preparing to stand together to receive the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments. Rashi teaches that the Israelites stood in this moment Ki'ish echad belev echad, all of them together like one person with one heart. Tradition suggesting that until they were united, the Israelites wouldn't be able to hear and experience the content of Revelation. This is what Sinai in our tradition is meant to represent. Not ideological unity per se, but a unity of the lev, of the heart. The reception of the Torah at Sinai, it's meant to represent a wedding between Israel and God. But perhaps this moment also represents a union between all of Israel. That only here at this mountain, adults and children, slaves and free people, Israelites and their fellow travelers, at this moment, at least for this instant, they could see directly into each other's hearts. And from that unity, they were ready to hear God and to accept the responsibility embedded in all of the commandments that followed. And their 2 central themes. First, the first commandment, Anochi Hashem Elohecha, I am the Lord your God. It's always been funny to me to think about this as a commandment. I am the Lord your God. I mean, what's it asking us to do? Perhaps this first commandment is really a reminder or a warning that as a precondition to any system of law that I, God, might give, it has to be prefaced on this: a willingness to see each other, to expose your own vulnerability, and to want to sit with other people in your community, in their fullness, those messy, imperfect, different than you, friction-laden, sometimes frustrating people. And second, God gives them the foundational laws for how a community that truly sees each other must live. Do not steal, do not murder, do not covet. These commandments are basic not because they're simple, but because when they're violated, other people are reduced to instruments for our own desires and our own needs. Their dignity disappears and their personhood is diminished. The world, our tradition teaches, was created through 10 utterances. And perhaps these 10 commandments are a continuation of that first creation. 10 utterances meant to sustain the world. Because when we refuse to reduce one another to objects, when dignity is protected and our personhood is honored, creation itself continues to stand. And when we fail to live up to these commitments, the foundation of our world begins to crumble. This kind of vulnerability, this kind of radical compassion, that's what's required for revelation. And I think we know it's incredibly difficult to sustain. The Israelites they're not initially inspired by this moment of revelation. They're actually extremely uncomfortable. Right after the moment of theophany, the smoke and the lights and the sounds, the Israelites almost immediately recoil. You speak to us, they said to Moses, and we will obey. But let not God speak to us, lest we die. I've always read this moment as the Israelites resisting such a direct and intense connection with God. But perhaps they step back for another reason. The vulnerability involved of this kind of unity, of this shared understanding, maybe it's just too intense. And the rest of the Tanakh, the rest of the Hebrew Bible, it's full of stories of those same Israelites, those same 12 tribes, often collaborating with each other, but too often fighting with each other as well. Perhaps yearning to wind back to this moment of revelation when their hearts were one. The Bible is a story of our ancestors who, like us, yearn to mend their own hearts aching. When I look at our country in this moment, the tragedy that I see is that we are losing the ability to see each other's aching hearts. And in this way, we're losing our ability to hear God's revelation. I see too many instances of those meant to protect our communities using intimidation and cruelty. And I see too many of our leaders cheering it on. Instead of looking for ways to bring the brokenhearted together, they time and time again choose a different path. But we know these paths: to create scapegoats, to silence dissent, to move us further and further away from the kind of revelation we actually need to guide us through this uncertain moment. So, a spiritual question for this Shevat Yitro. This morning, when we just all stood together, reenacting a spirit of unity and revelation, our question might be this: how do we find ourselves and our way back to Sinai? Do we have the courage to wander backwards into the desert to find that unified heart once again? To be clear, I don't think that unity requires moral relativism. I don't think that we should allow cruelty and injustice to persist just because there are some folks who seem to advocate for it at this moment. Of course, we know all too well what comes when we don't confront justice and injustice head on. We're obligated to speak out, to not stand idly by the blood of our neighbor. And we should do it in a way that pushes us towards a shared empathy. Perhaps we can learn something from the earlier section of this week's Parsha as well. This is the Torah of Yitro himself, the Midianite priest and father-in-law of Moshe, who comes to reunite Zipporah, Moses' wife, and their children with the family. Yitro spends some time observing Moses at work, and he notices that Moses is spending his entire day standing before the Israelites, resolving disputes and making judgments. Not only does Moses no longer have time for his family, but his long hours may be affecting the quality of his judgments. His ability to see his own people fully, it might be diminishing. Yitro pulls Moshe aside and says, Lo tov hadavar asher ata oseh. The thing you are doing is lo tov. It's not good. You might hear a resonance in these words, lo tov. Remember that when God creates the world, God looks out after each day and calls it tov, calls it good. Yitro sees what Moses is creating and he declares it the opposite, lo tov. Yitro is the outsider who sees a system of laws and norms which are no longer serving the community. I imagine that Yitro can see into the heart of Moshe, Moses so desperately wanting to carry his people and help deliver them to the promised land. He wants to serve God and be the leader that God has asked him to be and that the Israelites expect. And in that process, he loses sight of his true task. Yitro comes to remind Moses that a set of laws that no longer gives space to see each person in their fullness is a system that no longer creates order. It brings us back to chaos. Surely the injustice that Yitro witnessed was not as violent or dehumanizing as what we see today. But the lesson's the same. Laws and policies that fail to recognize human dignity cannot sustain a community or a country or a world. Our task as Jews, it's not only to follow law, but to advocate for laws rooted in seeing one another fully, in preserving the image of God in every single person. In the coming weeks, there are going to be opportunities to make our voices heard on these issues, to be a force towards restoring or possibly reimagining the kind of empathy we need to maintain a just society. Some of us will travel to Washington, D.C. this week for the Jews Against ICE rally. Others will join in a multi-faith action in Annapolis on Thursday morning. Others may write or advocate in quieter ways. It's all important, it's all needed. This is the kind of holy advocacy that fits squarely within our Jewish responsibility to our covenants, to look at the world and to ensure that all hearts are seen. One of my teachers, Rabbi Eben Leder, pointed out this week that the Aramaic translation of the Torah, when it's describing the giving of the Ten Commandments, it writes, God speaking with a great voice that never ceased. The implication is that God's revelation at Sinai was not a one-time event. It's ongoing. It's happening right now. It's a reminder that we are partners with God to build communities in which revelation can continue to order the world. We start by standing up for our neighbors. This is the heart-healing work. May it be our sacred work until the words of revelation can no longer, not ever, be ignored. Shabbat Shalom.